Chief Rabbi Yitzhak Yosef has rejected demands by women rabbis to be ordained and for women in general to study Jewish law at an advanced level. He also issued an all-out attack on Reform Judaism, describing it as fake and falsified Judaism. Rabbi Yosef also compared Reform Jews unfavorably with secular Jews. He, however, believes that Reform Jews could be taught and brought back to Torah observance. According to him, Reform Jews falsified the Torah and that their entire Torah is fraudulent.
And hopefully there will be a breakthrough. Just the fact that women can apply, I think, is a very important step. And may the best person win.
Right after his threats, Israel's Supreme Court sided with women rabbis. The court gave the chief rabbinate 90 days to find a solution to allow women to take exams in Jewish law and receive regime-backed rabbinic accreditation. The ruling came in response to a petition by women in Israel who say they are discriminated against by the male-dominated institutions. They cited that in Israel, women cannot obtain valuable qualifications that men can. The women rabbis believe that the regime must intervene. According to them, Judaism is meant to be accessible to all of the Jews who live inside and outside of Israel. They believe that how they live and practice Judaism should not be decided upon by a group of rabbis. Women rabbis blame the regime for siding with the rabbinate and not breaking it up, as they consider it to be a religious monopoly with no competition. For decades, Orthodox women from the growing Reform Judaism movement who have been wanting to be officially recognized as rabbis are once again finding it difficult to get the approval of the male-dominated Grand Rabbinate in Israel. In order for women rabbis to go mainstream in Israel, Israel's regime-backed Grand Rabbinate must accept woman ordination. If female rabbis are accepted into ordination, they will finally become state-funded and given official rabbinic jobs and other economic benefits. The rabbinate that is led by Chief Rabbi Yitzhak Yosef has already announced it would go on strike if forced by the regime to implement the decision. Israel's rabbinate was established in 1921 during the British Mandate. Since Israel's inception onto Palestinian lands in 1948, the rabbinate has maintained power over all religious affairs, including conversion and kashrut or Jewish dietary laws, as well as marriage, divorce, and prayer at the Western Wall. Hundreds of rabbis work for the rabbinate or otherwise in publicly funded rabbinic positions across Israel. In Israel, women feel that they lack authority in many aspects of the political, economic, social, and religious spheres. According to women rabbis, many of the male-dominated spheres of life impact them on a daily basis. Thus, they are keen on seeking to gain religious authority. The Israeli regime has begun to allow women to take the same test as rabbi men, but they are still not ordained. The ordination can only come from the rabbinate, which has rejected to do so thus far. If they are ordained, which is highly unlikely, these women rabbis would be hired into regime-backed roles.
It is a little bit like that, but for complex reasons. We have a problem, I would say it's a problem in Israel, and that is the politicization of religion. I would say religion should not be part of the political struggles that take place. I do not believe personally that we should have religious political parties. All parties should be seeing to the religious welfare of the community. But the moment you make a religion a political commodity, then it becomes involved in political competition. And religion becomes a tool of political competition. That is what we have in Israel with regards to the political situation.
For these women rabbis, ordination means economic incentives, especially at these dire economic times that Israel is facing. Real money is at stake here. Rabbinic certification also comes with child care allowances paid by authorities. In fact, men studying at yeshiva currently receive subsidies for child care, while women studying at yeshivas do not. A yeshiva is a Jewish educational institution that focuses on the study of traditional religious texts, primarily the Talmud and the Torah, and Jewish law.
Therefore, you might get a secular party that takes up the cause of women's advancement or women rabbis, not necessarily because they really care about women's well-being, but because it is an opportunity to attack other political parties that protect the religious establishment because it serves their political interests. At the same time, the fact that these political interests on the so-called religious parties is aligned to the chief rabbinate means that those political parties prevent open market forces from impacting on the chief rabbinate. So yes, these issues become weapons in political infighting within the Israeli society at large. You can't talk about representing because the establishment in Israel, the chief rabbinate, is an exclusively male Orthodox establishment. They will not recognize women as having any public religious position. So they will not have representative roles. What is happening here is not from the top down. It is something that's coming from the bottom up. It is women who are educated and knowledgeable saying, we want to have more of a public role in Jewish life.
רחל דקל.
רחל, את בת כמה?
18.
רחל, האם את חושבת שנשים רבניות צריכות לעבור הסמכה?
כן, בטח. כי מגיעה להם את אותה זכות כמו שיש לגברים רבנים, לדעתי.
הבנתי. ואם תוכרח את הרבנות לעשות סמיכה לנשים, האם את חושבת שהם צריכים ללכת כאילו לעשות שביתה?
אני חושבת שבמידה והכריחו אותם בניגוד לרצונם, אז הן צריכות שיהיה להן את הזכות לעשות שביתה, בדיוק כמו לרבנים, אבל אם הן בעד זה, אז לא.
הבנתי. האם את חושבת גם שנשים רבנות מציבות אתגר לרבנים או ליהדות האורתודוקסית?
כן, זה פשוט לא משהו שמקובל בחברה האורתודוקסית, אבל אני חושבת שאפשר להתמודד עם זה, שצריך לקבל את זה.
אז למה את חושבת שנשים רבניות צריכות לעבור הסמכה?
כי ברגע שאין להם סמכות, זה בעצם אין הרבה משמעות לתפקיד שלהם, וכדי שתהיה משמעות לתפקיד שלהם, הן צריכות שיהיה להם משהו בידיים שהם יוכלו לעבוד איתו.
The issue wasn't taken too kindly on social media. Jadib asks, why hasn't Israel's chief rabbinate blacklisted women rabbis? Avi says that he is against women rabbis regardless, and he further says that he doesn't support anyone who doesn't support Israel. According to Avi, a rabbi that doesn't support Israel shouldn't be leading a congregation of Jews. Luna says that she's against women rabbis too, but states that she's not against women teaching, but all the female rabbis, according to her, just make themselves look like men. Jude believes that if a woman in Israel converts to Orthodox, she is considered Jewish, but if she converts to Reform or Conservative, she isn't considered Jewish. Michelle states that if the rabbinate isn't functioning, women can't get anything and other personal status issues won't be resolved.
Okay, first of all, we need to understand that this Israeli rabbinate is not a representation of the Jewish religion. It happens to be people looking religious people supposedly presenting the religious face of the state of Israel. This is not legitimate whatsoever. This is an element of a purely secular movement using a religious organization for a religious face to this irreligious movement, to this irreligious company. This is ridiculous. Now, why they decide to refuse females to be ordained as rabbis. I'm not so sure that it's really something that they refuse to do, since they are serving this secular movement and they are paid by this secular movement, and they do what the state of Israel requires of them. In my opinion, what is this refusal now is because they understand that so many masses of religious Jews who will never accept this would stand up in arms to refuse something which is totally opposed and contradicted to thousands of years tradition of Jewish people.
יש נשים סתומות. אל תתפלאו למה גברים רוצחים נשים. אישה בוגדת בבעלה, מוצאים אותה, שורפים אותה במקום, לא היה משחקים, לא היה זמן, לא כמו היום, נותנים לה כביכול עושה מה שהיא רוצה, אין דבר כזה.
אז האישה באופן טבעי צריכה את הדבר הזה לשים בושם, כיוון שבאופן טבעי הריח שלה הוא פחות טוב, זה מה שחז"ל אומרים. והאיש באופן טבעי לא צריך את זה.
כל ילד שנפטר בבתי חולים, כל ילד חולה בבתי חולים, זה כי רק דבר אחד, כי את שיחקת עם השיער שלך, את לא מתביישת. תורה כל יום ילדים נפטרים, ילדים מתים, ילדים נקברים. שתדעי לך זה השיער שלא אספת אותו בתורה בקעה.
אישה שלא מכסה את שערה, אומר הזוהר, ישנם כוחות חיצוניים שיונקים משערה כל השפע שזורם דרכה. לכן אישה צריכה לעשות את שערה דווקא מהרגע שהיא התקדשה.
שהאישה, מה זה אישה? אישה זה דבר בלי שכל, בלי דעת. מה זה עצמה שיש לך אישה? איזה שטויות זה.
It's all about the money. Well, at least partly. Female rabbis are seeking the same economic opportunity as men rabbis through the Rabbinate. Israel has a religious services ministry with a massive budget and a wide range of paid employment positions that are often open exclusively to Orthodox rabbis, which until now has meant only men. The Religious Services Ministry, which has an annual budget of more than $290 million, employs hundreds of rabbis, including roughly 150 municipal positions, and jobs in hospitals, schools, prisons, and courts, all currently only open to ultra-Orthodox male rabbis. The hiring process for many of the jobs is done not by the Rabbinate. These councils are almost exclusively composed of Orthodox male rabbis. Back in 2018, the regime issued a directive to make them at least 30% women within a year of the formation of a new cabinet, a process that should be happening right now, but female rabbis deny that this is the case. The Chief Rabbinate is an ultra-Orthodox entity recognized by Israeli law as the supreme rabbinic authority for Judaism in Israel. The Reform and conservative streams of Judaism, where the women rabbis usually hail from, are not recognized by the ultra-Orthodox establishment. Ultra-Orthodox Jews are opposed to allowing women to serve as rabbis, arguing that it is a violation of Jewish law. The institution wields enormous power. It dictates social norms and has the power to enforce and regulate marriage, divorce, conversions, burials, kosher laws, Jewish immigration to Israel, and religious rituals. Earlier this year, women scholars who seek to be ordained as rabbis filed a petition to the Israeli regime for them to do so. In response to the petition, Attorney General Avichai Mandelblit said that Israel was in favor of the move, but noted that the current circumstances by which the Chief Rabbinate is handling the ordaining process place legal hurdles in the move's way. The ruling is not the first pressing the Rabbinate to diversify. Also, Israel's Supreme Court in 2013 ruled that women who graduated from a kashrut certification or Jewish dietary laws program run by the religious Zionist women's organization Emunah must be recognized by the Rabbinate. The Rabbinate responded by changing its processes so that training courses were no longer required in Judaic law, thus relieving itself of pressure by the regime.
So nobody, to the best of my knowledge, voluntarily gives up power. Power has to be demanded to be shared. And there has to be enough of a demand that those that have the exclusive power realize that it's in their interest to share it, because otherwise they will lose it altogether. This situation has not yet come to bear on the chief rabbinate or on the so-called religious political parties. At the moment, their control of the religious interests and religious services is so absolute that they have no motivation to share it. Oh, they are definitely making a kind of challenge. It is definitely a challenge. But if you would ask the religious establishment, they would say to you, these women are not really religious, because if they were really religious, they would not be threatening us. They are trying to bring us down, which means they're trying to bring religion down. Now, this is both because they are scared of the threat to their power, but it's also because they don't understand the mentality of these women. Their mentality is a mentality from another age. And these women are pioneers in a newer understanding of their role as women. And therefore there is a complete gulf of lack of understanding between them. So traditionally, the rabbi's authority is given to him in effect by the community, by the congregation. But in Israel we have a formal institution that is governmentally subvented. In other words, it gets its funds from the government. There is a Ministry of Religious Affairs that provides for the religious needs of the communities. And there is a chief rabbinate that has exams for people to qualify as rabbis, and therefore that controls the positions, which are salaries. It controls kosher licenses for hotels and restaurants, etc., which is also a lot of money. It controls marriages and matters of family law. So these are institutions which have both a lot of financial resources, deal with a lot of appointments, and therefore as a result have a lot of power. And they maintain a monopoly on matters concerning the Jewish community. And that establishment does not consider to be appropriate at all for women to have any kind of public position.
לעבור הסמכה.
יכול להיות שכן.
למה?
לא יודע איך להגיד לך, אבל הסמכה של מה למשל?
כאילו לעשות, להיות רבניות, כאילו לעשות את התפקיד שלהם, לעשות...
לא, להיות רבנית וכל זה. יש מצב שאפשר. יש מצב כזה שאפשר.
האם הן צריכות את ההסמכה הזאת?
בדרך כלל הן צריכות את זה. בדרך כלל, לפי דעתי, אני חושב כן.
The control of the rabbinate is under the spotlight online. Haviv believes that even if the rabbinate strikes, it remains to be seen how long it lasts before everyone wonders why they control so much. He says that social workers, for example, are necessary. According to him, Israelis need them at their jobs, so their strikes are effective. The rabbinate, on the other hand, he says, is an artificial monopoly. Rachel says that, as far as she understands, the rabbinate is only threatening to strike their rabbinic testing and ordination system, not the entire rabbinate. Elon sarcastically writes that he's sure when the rabbinate stops handing out fines to kosher restaurants that fail to pay their exorbitant fees, the people will take to the streets in outrage. Dan believes that in case of a strike, people won't be able to get married, divorced, kosher certificates could expire, and then the businesses that rely on them will suffer. So this is a big threat, according to Dan.
Divisions within Orthodox Jews in Israel are quite significant. And I think we have to remember that those who oppose in the rabbinate, in the state official rabbinate, to the exams belong to this so-called national religious or religious Zionist camp. There are also many ultra-Orthodox or Haredi Jews who recognize the state but don't take subsidies or relate to it in a very distant way. For example, they refuse to go to the army. And then there is an even more extreme group that doesn't recognize the state and tries to avoid any contact with state institutions. So we should not take the state rabbinate as something that is overarching all Orthodox Jews in Israel. It's recognized by some Jews, but definitely not by all Jews. And in the Jewish tradition, we do not have a central institution like the Vatican that can decree to others, even though the state rabbinate in Israel has been trying to position itself as the Catholic Vatican, which met with tremendous resistance from Jews within Israel and outside of it. Well, the Israeli government is composed of very, very different elements. It has very secular, anti-religious elements. It has religious Jews in it. So to talk about the unified position of Israeli government with respect to women makes no sense. The Israeli state, however, has an obligation not to discriminate between women and men. And that's where the issue really lies, that the state, according to Israeli law, doesn't have the right to discriminate against women.
The chief rabbinate, Yitzhak Yosef, has not taken threats by woman rabbis lightly. He is now accusing atheist elements of trying to downplay the importance of the rabbinate as it sees itself as the representative of Judaism in Israel. The Israeli chief rabbi has threatened that the rabbinate will go on an unprecedented strike if it is forced to train these women into its version of Jewish law. The rabbinate believes that through such pressure, the Israeli regime is backing these liberal women in order to challenge their authority and ultimately change the rabbinate's policies towards friendlier ones that benefit the regime. The regime has been at odds over the policies of the rabbinate, which it believes goes contrary to the policies of the secular-minded Israeli regime. The Israeli rabbinate's opposition to recognizing female rabbis follows years in which it has been rigid on a host of other issues, including marriage, divorce, and conversion. Many Israelis have for years left to get married or use domestic partnerships rather than adhere to the rabbinate's rules on Orthodox marriage ceremonies. This, according to observers, is further putting the Israeli system in jeopardy. Here are the news making the press in Israel. Ynet News. Israel could still face a fourth round of elections, Knesset Speaker Yariv Levin warned. His comments come after a proposal to delay the date by which Israel's budget must be approved. Levin's comments come as Israeli politicians struggle to agree on just about anything, according to protesters on the ground who demand an end to Netanyahu's rule. I-24 News. Anti-Netanyahu protesters continue. Thousands of Israelis have rallied again in occupied Jerusalem, Al-Quds, and Tel Aviv amid a massive anti-regime movement calling for the resignation of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Some 850,000 Israelis are currently unemployed, representing 20% of Israel's workforce. Globes. Israel's budget deficit jumps to 7.2% of GDP. The deficit has continued widening since the coronavirus crisis took hold, from 4.8% at the end of April, 4% at the end of March, and 3.1% at the end of February. The Israeli Central Bank warns that if the coalition cabinet doesn't do anything about it, the deficit can further increase. The Jerusalem Post. As Israel inches closer to a fourth election after two failed ones and a shaky third one, 68% of the public would blame Netanyahu for any new election. Asked if Netanyahu should be prevented from running due to his criminal indictments, respondents were almost evenly divided, with 48% saying yes and 52% saying no. The poll was taken by 103 FM, part of the Jerusalem Post group.